We might complain about our own lives and how bad they are and wish they were different. Yet millions of people all over the world would trade places with us any day because their own situations are so much worse. They are forced to flee from their own homes and from their countries. They leave everything behind, sometimes even family members. They are persecuted, they are tortured, and sometimes they are even killed. Basically because of their faith, because of their ethnic background, political views, or simply because they look and think differently. These are refugees. They abandon their lives in search of refuge in distant and neighboring countries. Despite these circumstances, the status of refugee is not just automatically given. It is actually a legal status that is granted to people who have evidence and can prove that they have a well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, based on their religion, their nationality, and/or political affiliation. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is mandated to protect refugees, stateless people, and internally displaced people. They are also meant to guide governments on the rights of refugees. And yes, refugees do have rights. Sadly, today, the world hosts the largest number of displaced people since the Second World War. And a third of these are refugees. Now, to attain refugee status requires a three-country process. So the first country is your own country that you're fleeing from, where you're being persecuted. And then there's passage into a second country from which you can be processed to apply to be eligible to become a refugee. Then there's the third country, which is the resettlement country, where you actually end up living as a refugee. To illustrate this process, I'd like to share with you a story. This is Fatima's story. It is a true story, but I've changed her name so that her identity may be protected. Fatima lived in Iraq with her husband and 3 daughters. They lived relatively well. They were well educated, they ran a business, and they thought they were fine. Until her 11-year-old daughter was almost kidnapped at gunpoint while waiting for the bus outside her school. They remembered that 3 years earlier, a bullet in an envelope had been left on their front doorstep. And this was a warning, because Fatima's sister Sarah had been working with the United States government in Iraq as an interpreter. For the militia, that meant she was a traitor. She was hounded until she finally escaped on a special immigrant visa. Now, this is a special visa that is granted to persons who collaborate with the United States in conflict situations. Her brother was also collaborating with the United States military in Iraq, and he too was targeted. They shot up his house, it was bullet-riddled, they killed all his friends, and at this time, all of Fatima's siblings and her mother escaped to the United States as refugees. But meanwhile, Fatima herself and her young family remained in Iraq. They tried to get out. They were continuously persecuted by the militia. In fact, the militia even asked the children how their parents prayed at home. This final incident of attempted kidnapping was the final straw. So there's a special situation in Iraq where you can actually apply to be processed to be eligible to become a refugee from within Iraq. So they tried that, but it was taking too long and the threats were increasing. So the family fled to Jordan on visitors' visas. Upon arrival in Jordan, they immediately went to seek out the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees so that they could get protection papers. They arrived to find a long line, hundreds of people in a line from Syria, Yemen, Sudan, Somalia, Libya, everywhere, also waiting for the same service. Fortunately, priority is given to women with children at risk, to victims of torture and violence, and to the elderly. They're viewed as not being able to pose a threat to the host government, to the government of resettlement countries. The process is very slow and it is very repetitive. and it entails a series of health and background checks and multiple interviews. Responses have to be exact, they must be precise, and they're checked and rechecked for consistency. There's also a whole barrage of questions, some of which may include, tell me what happened leading up to the time you left your home. How did you leave? Who did you live with? Have you ever served in the military? Tell me the names and dates of birth of all your family members. Sometimes it's very difficult for somebody to keep up, and they may become confused. And if there's any inconsistency at all, one of two things may happen. The person may be, if they're lucky, at best be re-interviewed, and at worst, their case is actually denied and then they're closed. So Fatima and her small family went to the processing center early in the morning with a 6-month-old baby. They arrived at 5 a.m. so that they could beat the crowds. No one had eaten. When they arrived there, they found that 1, there was no food in the center. 2, there's no food allowed in the center, only the baby's milk. The interviews are a minimum of 2 hours each per person. Fatima's husband was a diabetic. He had not eaten either. And by the time his turn came for being interviewed, it was 9 hours later. He was hypoglycemic, he was disoriented, he could not keep track of his responses, he was not consistent, and he was denied. They were told, well, you can look for legal assistance and then you can try again. So the family remained in Jordan for a while, hoping that an opportunity would arise where he could be re-interviewed. In the meantime, they needed to sustain themselves, so he looked for a job. Jobs were available, but employers frequently took advantage of people in that situation. He worked for 3 months without pay and then never got paid. He was illegal, he was stateless, and there was no one to complain to. At that point, they decided it was better for Fatima and the children to proceed to the United States, and he would follow soon after. In the United States, there are non-profit and faith-based organizations that work together with the United States government to receive and resettle refugees when they come. Here in Tulsa, Catholic Charities and the YWCA play a very pivotal role in facilitating the resettlement of refugees and assisting with their self-sufficiency. Fatima arrived at JFK. She was bewildered, this big airport. She had 2 small children. To make things worse, 2 of her bags had been lost in transit. And the 3rd bag that did arrive had split down the middle and her clothes were strewn all over the place. She was traumatized, she was desperate. She longed for her husband. She had always depended on him. But because he had been denied, she had suddenly become a single parent. She had been told that he would follow in about 5 months. That was 4 years ago. Today, in 2018, Fatima still struggles to secure refugee status for her husband. But she knew that she had to get to working very quickly. Within 6 months, she has to start paying back for the trip. You see, refugees do not get a free ride. You actually have to pay back for the trip to come to the United States. And you're given 6 months, by which time you should have found a job. She couldn't find work. She was desperate. And it was only in her 7th month that she found work as an interpreter. By this time, she was ready to give it all up and go back and join her husband. So, that is Fatima's story, and it is still unfolding. But not every case is the same. Experiences may vary depending on country of origin, where you're coming from, your mode of transportation, etc. If you take, for example, the Burmese refugees, they often travel by road or by boat from Burma into neighboring Malaysia or some other Asian neighbor. If you're fortunate enough to have transport arranged, you don't have a seat. You lie at the bottom of the vehicle underneath everybody's bags and luggage and feet and vegetables and anything else that they can place on top of you. Because if you're detected, you will definitely be jailed. You are very most likely to be tortured, and it's very possible that you will be killed. So you're very quiet. And for this reason, babies and children are actually left behind because they make noise. And this entails you working with smugglers that take you out of your country as far as possible into the next country. Sometimes it's only just up to the border that they take you. And that as well is not a free ride. You're expected to pay for it later because of the risk that is incurred to get you there. If you have to get on a boat at some point of that trip, you may be asked to strip to the bare minimum or even to be totally naked so that more people can fit in the boat. And if you have to swim part of your way, you're covered in mud so that you can avoid detection. Arrival in the second country has its own dangers and risks and challenges. Families may sometimes be placed together in the same camp, or they may be split up and be in different places. For young women and girls, there is always that risk of sexual abuse and exploitation, including trafficking. And this may continue for the entire time that they are in the second country, waiting to be processed, to become eligible, to apply to become a refugee. And it can last anywhere from 5 to 10 years during that entire time. And while they're there, because they need to fend for themselves and they have to start working so they can pay back the smugglers, they have no state, they're stateless, they're illegal, so they're in a constant hide and seek with the police. Now, the police are not interested in arresting them if they catch them. They're interested in extorting their money. So they'll leave them to be free so they can continue to work, so they can continue to extort. Now, finally, if you are approved, you are referred to countries that have resettlement programs. The refugees do not have a choice as to where they want to go, but the governments of participating countries will select from the referrals candidates that are acceptable to them to come to their countries. In the case of the United States, if you're referred to come to the United States, the whole re-examination process starts again. You're examined and re-examined until a decision is made to accept you. And even that decision is reviewed by several agencies of the Department of Homeland Security. After that, fingerprints are taken, and those fingerprints are cross-checked against the federal security databases. If there are any red flags, either it's delayed or it is denied altogether. So you can see that by the time a refugee arrives in the United States, they have gone through, at a minimum, 5 interviews. And every aspect of their biodata has been scrutinized by numerous agencies of the United States government. So you're finally approved and you're coming to resettle to the United States. You arrive in a country where you don't know anyone, most likely. You don't speak the language. And, the population may not be necessarily welcoming. Tulsa is a special place where the mayor has extended a welcoming hand to refugees. And in turn, refugees have continued to contribute to Tulsa's economy. They work in the manufacturing industry, they're homeowners, they support the real estate industry. Some of them have even established their own businesses and have become employers themselves. Refugees come to Tulsa from Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria, from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, from Sudan, Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, as well as from the former Soviet Union, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, and even Russia. So once they are here, they learn English, they attend university, they teach at university, and they bring professional qualifications, skills, knowledge to add to Tulsa's diversity and culture. So refugees, when they come, they don't come to take anything away from host populations, but they come to add to the richness of America. Their risk and ours is well worth it for the freedom, peace, and hope. And after all those years, they can finally send back for children, parents, siblings, and yes, spouses left behind. Thank you.